I'll give you everything.
I'll give you everything, she cried. But the rancher faced a dark secret. The first thing Emily Carter felt was the bite of rough rope cutting into her wrists. Her head throbbed from being dragged across the prairie and into a dim shack that smelled of smoke and dust. Her hair clung to her cheeks, tangled and heavy with grit. The pale blue of her dress was ripped, streaked with mud from where she had fallen. A single lantern threw yellow light across warped boards, and standing in that glow was Jake Mercer, tall, broad-shouldered, his grin crooked in a way that promised harm. On the scarred table between them lay a sheet of paper stamped with a fake seal, its edges curling in the heat from the stove. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Jake slammed his palm against the paper. Sign it, Emily, and this all ends. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. No. He leaned in close, the smell of whiskey and smoke clinging to his breath. You think you get to choose? He lifted a branding iron from the fire, its tip glowing orange, and held it just inches from her skin. She recoiled, pressing back into the chair until the ropes dug deeper. A hiss of burning metal filled her nose. Tears blurred her sight, but she clenched her jaw. Sign, Jake said again, his voice a low snarl. Or you'll hang. He thrust the paper against her chest and pressed the hot iron to the wood beside her head. Sparks spit up, lighting the shadows. Emily flinched, her heart hammering. She prayed someone, anyone, might hear her. But the prairie outside lay still. With a violent jerk, Jake yanked her out of the shack. Harsh daylight seared her eyes. The wind whipped at her torn dress as he dragged her toward a lonely cottonwood tree. He tossed a loop of rope over a branch, the fibers rasping as he pulled it taut. She felt the scratch of bark against her back when he forced her upright and bound her arms tight to her sides. Her bare feet left the ground. She swung there in the raw sunlight, helpless, every breath a battle. Jake stepped back, admiring the sight. That's justice for a girl who won't learn. Emily gasped, the rope squeezing tighter with each shallow breath. Pain shot through her shoulders. A bruise was already swelling where the cord bit into her skin. She thought of her family, faces fading in memory. She thought of the quiet life she'd wanted. The world around her blurred into heat and fear. Jake paced beneath her like a predator. You'll sign when you can't stand the hurt anymore. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Please. The prairie stretched forever. No house, no town, no rider coming fast. Only the groan of the branch above and the rough laugh of the man who'd put her there. At that moment, Emily felt smaller than she'd ever been. Her dignity stripped away, hope barely alive, she forced out a faint promise. I'll give you everything. Just let me live. Her words disappeared in the wind, but somewhere inside, a stubborn spark told her story wasn't done. Far across the plain, a rider slowed his horse. Sam Reed, weathered from years of sun and long trails, shaded his eyes against the glare. The scene before him hit like a kick to the chest. A young woman hanging limp from a tree, left to suffer. Not even coyotes deserve that kind of end. He tightened the reins, and his old bay mare stamped, uneasy. Sam swung down, boots crunching in brewgrass. He didn't rush. He moved with steady purpose, one hand slipping to the worn handle of the Bowie knife on his belt. Emily blinked through the haze of pain. For the first time all day, a flicker of hope slid into her heart. Her lips trembled as she forced out words, rough but clear. Help, please. Sam studied the knots Jake had tied, cruel knots meant to cut into flesh. He set the edge of his knife against the rope. With one clean slice, the line snapped. Emily dropped, but Sam caught her before her feet touched dirt. She weighed almost nothing, trembling so hard he could feel it through her torn dress. You're safe now, he said, voice low and steady. She clung to him, tears soaking his shirt. Somewhere behind them, a dry twig cracked. Sam's mare tossed her head and snorted. He froze, his grip tightening on Emily's arm. That sound wasn't the wind. Sam Reed shifted his weight, every sense sharpened by the brutal silence stretching across the prairie. He eased Emily behind him, his palms steady against her back. The cut rope lay in the dirt like a dead snake, proof of how close she had come to losing everything. Out from the brush stepped Jake Mercer, a revolver dangling loose from his fingers. The crooked grin on his face deepened when he saw them together. "Well now," Jake drawled, voice oily. "Looks like the old rancher wants to play hero." Emily's breath caught. Her hands trembled where they clutched the torn fabric of her dress. Sam kept his body between her and the gun, his eyes fixed on Jake's. "You've done enough," Sam said, voice calm but edged with iron. "Put the weapon down and walk away." Jake laughed, a harsh sound that rolled across the open land. "You think you're some kind of lawman, Reed? The law doesn't care about a runaway girl or a gray-haired cowboy too stubborn to mind his own business." He took a slow step forward, the barrel of the revolver lifting. Emily could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The rope still dangled from the branch, swaying in the dry wind. Her mind screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Sam's gaze stayed steady. "You tied her up. You forged papers that don't mean a thing. That's kidnapping and fraud, Jake, and you know it." For the first time, a crack slid through Jake's confidence. His eyes darted toward Emily, then back to Sam. "She talked, didn't she?" he snapped. Emily shook her head, but the truth showed in her eyes. Jake's jaw tightened. He cocked the hammer, the click loud enough to make Emily flinch. Sam didn't hesitate. With a smooth motion, he flicked his wrist. The knife blade flashed in the sunlight, spinning end over end. It struck Jake's hand, knocking the revolver into the grass. Jake cursed and lunged, but Sam was already moving. He closed the distance with a burst of strength that belied his years. One shove sent Jake face first in the dirt. Sam planted a knee between Jake's shoulder blades and grabbed the rope lying near Emily's feet. With practiced hands, he bound Jake's wrist tight. Dust clung to Jake's sweat-damp shirt as he spat curses into the ground. Emily staggered closer, her whole body trembling. Sam rose and steadied her, his hand firm but gentle on her elbow. "It's over," he told her quietly. "At least for now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted the nightmare to end right there under the wide, unblinking sky. But something in Jake's eyes, a hard, simmering promise, warned her it wasn't finished. Sam tugged the last knot hard and hauled Jake upright. "You're coming with us," he said. "We'll let the Marshal decide what to do." Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing dust and tears together. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't come," her voice failed. Sam met her gaze, and for a heartbeat there was more than pity in his look. There was respect, and maybe the first faint flicker of something stronger. He gave a small nod. "You're tougher than you think," he said. The sun hung low, painting the land in gold as they started toward Sam's horse. Emily walked carefully, still unsteady, but there was a new set to her shoulders. The air smelled of sage and warm dust. Behind them, the cottonwood swayed, its branches sighing as though releasing the weight of what had just happened. Sam tied Jake to the saddle horn with knots so firm the outlaw wouldn't breathe easy, let alone slip free. Emily mounted behind Sam, clinging lightly to the back of his shirt. The bay mare snorted, then moved forward at Sam's nudge, hooves striking a steady rhythm over the hard-packed ground. For the first time since sunrise, Emily allowed herself to imagine she might live past this day. Yet every few paces she glanced at Jake, slumped across the saddle. Even trussed up, he radiated danger, like a storm waiting for a crack in the sky. Sam felt it too. He kept his knife within reach, his posture loose but ready. The prairie stretched ahead, long shadows cutting across the grass. He didn't speak. He just kept riding, eyes scanning the horizon, ears tuned to every shift in the wind. Emily rested her cheek against the worn leather of Sam's vest, eyes half closed from exhaustion. The warmth of another human near her was enough to quiet the trembling inside, for now. The sun sank lower as they rode, the sky turning amber, then deepening toward crimson. A breeze swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant pine. Emily clung lightly to Sam's waist, steadying herself against the mare's rocking stride. She felt the ache in her shoulders where the rope had dug in, but the warmth of the man ahead of her kept the worst of the shivers at bay. Jake Mercer rode, slumped against the saddle horn, wrists bound so tight he couldn't scratch the sweat rolling down his temple. His eyes were narrow, unreadable in the dimming light. Now, and then a muscle flicked along his jaw, and Emily knew he was calculating, waiting for a chance. Sam's gaze kept sweeping the plain, pausing at every shadow stretching long across the earth. He had seen men like Jake before, men who didn't stop fighting just because they were tied. Sam's fingers rested near the hilt of his knife, as if the leather sheath itself steadied him. "You holding up?" Sam asked over his shoulder. Emily nodded, though the movement was small. "I think so," she murmured. Her voice still rasped from the rope's pressure, but it was steadier than before. "You did good back there," Sam said. "Most folks freeze solid in a moment like that. You kept your head." Emily almost smiled, but the bruises along her cheek pulled tight. "I was scared out of my mind," she admitted. "I still am." "Fear doesn't mean you're weak," Sam replied. "It just means you know how much you've got to lose." The words settled into the quiet, like pebbles dropped into a pond. Emily let herself breathe a little easier. They reached the edge of a forgotten lumber yard as the last of the sunlight turned the sky molten. The air smelled faintly of sap and old timber. Sam slowed the mare, scanning the piles of boards stacked higher than a man's head. His body stiffened. The place was too still. Even the windmill at the far end had stopped turning. "Something's off," he muttered. Emily's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Sam swung down from the saddle and offered a hand to help her dismount. She slid to the ground, careful not to look at Jake. Sam looped the mare's reins over a post and stepped closer to the outlaw, double-checking the knots. He didn't like the way Jake's shoulders shifted, almost as if testing for slack. "We walk from here," Sam said quietly to Emily. "Stay close." They had taken barely 10 steps into the yard when it happened. Jake twisted, throwing all his weight against the saddle. The rope slipped just enough for him to break free. He hit the ground hard but sprang up with a knife already glinting in his hand. Emily gasped, stumbling backward. Sam pivoted smoothly, knife drawn in one motion. The two men faced each other between the timber stacks, their shadows stretching long across the dirt. Jake's eyes gleamed, a feral light behind them. "You don't get it, Reed," he hissed. "She's mine. Always was." Emily's breath caught. She shook her head, finding a scrap of courage. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, voice unsteady but clear. Sam moved a half step forward, stand solid. "Put the knife down, Jake. Don't make this worse." Jake laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You think you can stop me? Old man, you don't have the guts." He lunged. Steel flashed as the blade slashed across Sam's shirt, missing his chest by an inch. Sam swung his arm, blocking the next strike, and pushed Emily out of reach. The fight wasn't long, but it was fierce. Jake slashed wildly, kicking up dust as he circled. Sam stayed grounded, every movement controlled. He waited, letting the outlaw burn through his rage. When Jake lunged again, Sam caught his wrist, twisted, and sent the knife skidding across the dirt. He shoved Jake down, pinning him against the ground. Emily darted forward, heart pounding, and scooped up the fallen blade. For a moment, fury burned bright in her chest. She held the knife high, hands trembling. She could end it, right here. Jake glared up at her, daring her. Her breath came fast. Then she lowered the blade and let it fall. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I won't be like you," she whispered. Sam tightened the rope around Jake's wrists again, knotting it until his fingers turned white. "This time," he said, voice firm, "you're not slipping free." Emily wiped her face with her sleeve. The tremor in her hands eased as she met Sam's gaze. There was no judgment there, only quiet understanding. Together, they hauled Jake to his feet. The last light bled from the sky, leaving the world washed in deep purple and gold. Emily stood taller now, though her body ached. She wasn't just someone rescued from a tree. She was a woman still standing, even after everything. The prairie was turning violet by the time Sam tied Jake to a thick post at the edge of the yard. The outlaw's breath came in hard bursts, his face streaked with sweat and dust. Sam tightened the rope until he was sure there'd be no tricks left in Jake's body. Only then did he look back at Emily. She stood a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself. The setting sun cast an orange band across her face, lighting the bruises under her eyes. She wasn't crying anymore, but her expression was raw, stripped of the defenses she'd carried all day. Sam walked toward her slowly, hands open so he didn't startle her. "You did right," he said gently. "You didn't let him drag you down to his level." Emily gave a shaky laugh that sounded almost like a sob. "I didn't feel brave. I just couldn't be like him. I don't want that kind of darkness in me." Sam nodded. "That's not weakness. That's strength most folks never find." For a moment they stood there, listening to the yard settle into quiet. A night bird called from somewhere in the grass. The last slices of sunlight clung to the piles of lumber, painting them gold, then fading to gray. Sam motioned to the mare. "We should get moving before it's too dark to see the trail." Emily hesitated, eyes flicking to Jake. He was watching her, lips pressed thin, a cruel smile lurking at the edges. Sam followed her gaze and gave a small shake of his head. "Ignore him. He's got nothing left but words." She nodded, then let Sam help her into the saddle. He swung up behind, steadying her as she settled against the leather. She felt the warmth of his chest close to her back, the quiet steadiness in the way he held the reins. It anchored her more than she wanted to admit. They rode in silence at first, hooves thudding softly over the dry ground. Stars began to prick the darkening sky, faint at first, then clear and cold as the twilight deepened. Emily breathed in the scent of sage and horse, letting the rhythm of the ride soothe the tremor in her hands. After a while, Sam spoke, voice low. "You got folks somewhere?" "Family." Emily shook her head. "No one close. My parents passed a few winters back. My brother went east looking for work and never came back." She hesitated, then added, "Jake offered me a job at his ranch. Said I'd be safe." I was fool enough to believe him. Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "That's on him, not you. A man chooses what kind of man he's going to be." She turned her head slightly, catching the outline of his face against the starlit plain. "And what kind of man are you, Sam Reed?" He gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just someone who tries to leave things better than he found them." They fell quiet again, the silence gentler this time. Emily watched the stars scatter wider across the sky. For the first time since morning, her chest didn't feel so heavy. Behind them, Jake shifted against the rope, muttering under his breath. Sam glanced back, making sure the outlaw was still secure. "We'll put him in the Marshal's hands," Sam said, more to reassure Emily than himself. "Tonight, you don't need to worry about him." Emily let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The day's terror still sat somewhere deep, but she could sense a thin thread of hope weaving through the fear. The trail widened, leading them toward the faint lights of a town far ahead. Emily kept her gaze fixed on that soft glow. It wasn't just a place anymore. It felt like a promise, proof that the world still held safety and maybe even kindness. Sam shifted slightly in the saddle so he could see her face. "You're going to be all right," he said quietly. "Might not feel like it yet, but you are." She met his eyes. "You really think so?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Something in his voice, steady, certain, warmed a spot inside her that had been cold all day. She turned back to the horizon, the mare's ears flicking forward at the smell of home. For a stretch they rode without speaking. Emily rested her palms against the worn leather and felt, for the first time in hours, that she might have some say in her own life. She wasn't just a girl tied to a tree. She was someone who had survived. Night had fully settled by the time they left the prairie behind. The town ahead showed a few lamps burning, small points of light against the dark. Sam slowed the mare, so she wouldn't stumble on the uneven ground. Emily sat straight in the saddle now, though every muscle ached from the long, hard day. Behind them, Jake rode tied to the saddle horn, silent but still dangerous. The air felt cooler. Crickets sang from the weeds along the trail. Emily breathed in and let it out slow, steadying herself. She was tired, but she wasn't weak anymore. Something inside her had shifted since Sam cut the rope from her wrists. "You holding up all right?" Sam asked. "I think so," she said quietly. "I don't feel safe yet, but it's better than before." "That's normal," Sam replied. "After what you went through, it takes time for your body to trust you're safe." They rode closer to the first wooden buildings of town. Smoke from a cook fire drifted through the air. A dog barked somewhere far off. The normal sounds gave Emily a small sense of peace. Sam stopped the mare near a water trough outside an old barn. "We'll let her rest for a moment," he said. He slid down and helped Emily step to the ground. Her legs felt shaky, but she stayed on her feet. Sam tied the horse, checked Jake's ropes, then led them all toward the street. The town wasn't much. A few stores, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a marshal's office farther down. Yellow light spilled through the windows, soft and warm. Emily felt herself drawn toward it, as if that little building meant safety. Inside the office, the marshal, a tall man with kind eyes, looked up from his desk. Sam gave a clear, simple account of what had happened. How he had found Emily, how Jake had trapped her, how there had been a fight. The marshal's face hardened as he listened. Jake tried to talk, but the marshal raised a hand. "You'll have your say later," he said. Two deputies stepped forward and took Jake into their custody. They searched him carefully, found another knife hidden in his boot, and shook their heads. Jake didn't fight, but his eyes followed Emily, cold and sharp. The marshal turned to her. "Ma'am, you're safe now. We'll see this man locked up until a judge can hear the case." Emily nodded. Relief washed over her, though she kept one eye on Jake until he was taken through a back door. She felt the weight of the day lift, but not all the way. Some part of her stayed alert, waiting for a new blow that might not come. Sam rested a hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said softly. "You stood up to him. That counts." Emily swallowed hard. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You didn't have to," Sam said. "That's the point." The marshal offered them a small room in the back of the office, so Emily could rest. She sat on a simple cot, letting her body sink into the thin mattress. The quiet felt strange after so much fear. Sam stood near the doorway, giving her space. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll be right outside." Emily looked at him for a moment. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Sam's eyes softened. "Because it was the right thing to do. Out here, folks have to look out for each other." Her lips trembled, but she gave a tiny nod. "Thank you." He tipped his hat and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door slightly open. Emily lay back and stared at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of wood and dust, but to her it was the sweetest air she had breathed in days. For the first time, she thought sleep might actually come. Outside, Sam leaned against the wall, listening to the quiet creak of the old building. He stayed watchful, knowing Jake Mercer's kind rarely gave up easy. But for tonight, Emily was safe, and that was enough. Emily woke before dawn. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The rough cot, the pale light coming through a narrow window, the steady creak of boards above her head. Then the memories came back, sharp and clear. The tree, the rope, Jake's face, Sam's steady hands cutting her free. Her body ached, but she felt lighter than the night before. She sat up slowly, letting her bare feet touch the cool floor. Outside, a rooster crowed, and somewhere a wagon rolled past on the street. Life was beginning again, even after everything. Sam stood near the doorway, arms folded across his chest. He must have stayed awake all night. There were faint shadows under his eyes, but his gaze was calm. When he saw her stirring, he gave a small nod. "Morning," he said quietly. "You get any rest?" "A little," she replied, rubbing at the stiffness in her neck. "You stayed there the whole night?" "Wanted to make sure no trouble came through." His voice was soft, but there was a firmness under it, the kind that made Emily feel steadier. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." Sam shook his head. "Don't owe me anything. Just focus on getting your strength back." Before Emily could speak, the marshal stepped in, hat in hand. "Morning, folks," he said. "Mercer's locked up tight. He'll face the judge this week. We'll see to it he doesn't give you more grief." Emily's shoulders eased a little, though a part of her stayed braced, as if waiting for another blow. The marshal's words helped, but she had learned in the hardest way how quickly safety could vanish. Sam must have seen the flicker in her eyes. "He's not walking out of here," he said gently. "You can let yourself breathe." She managed a faint smile. "I'll try." The marshal cleared his throat. "You'll need to give a statement. Won't take long." Emily told the story as simply as she could, though her voice shook when she spoke about the rope and the tree. Sam stayed close, silent but solid, like an anchor holding her steady. By the time she finished, her hands were trembling, and he handed her a tin cup of water. "You did fine," Sam said when the marshal left. "Our part's done." Emily studied him, seeing more than just a rescuer now. The lines on his face spoke of years spent out in the sun, of choices made and losses carried. "You could have kept riding yesterday," she said. "You didn't owe me a thing." Sam leaned back against the wall, gaze fixed on the floor. "I've seen too many folks look away," he said quietly. "Didn't want to be one of them." Something in his words settled deep inside her. She thought of all the moments in her life when she had wished someone would stand up for her, even in small ways. Maybe the world wasn't just made of people like Jake. Maybe there were still men like Sam Reed, steady when everything else fell apart. The sun was fully up now, casting thin stripes of light through the window. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling warmth seep slowly back in her bones. Sam straightened and nodded toward the door. "You hungry? There's a cafe down the street. Might be good to get fresh air." "Yes," she said after a pause. "I think I'd like that." They walked outside together. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of bread baking somewhere nearby. The town looked different in daylight. Plain wooden buildings, a few horses tied along the street, smoke rising from chimneys. Ordinary, steady, alive. Emily drew a long breath. For the first time since yesterday, she felt part of that life again, not just a shadow at its edge. Sam led her toward the small cafe, holding the door for her as they stepped inside. The warmth of the stove and the smell of coffee wrapped around them. Emily slid into a chair by the window. Sam ordered coffee and eggs, simple food, but to Emily it felt like a feast. She watched him while they waited. His hands were large, rough from work, yet careful as he set a napkin on the table. She realized he wasn't just protecting her because of duty. It was something quieter, a respect for her life. When the plates arrived, Emily ate slowly, letting herself taste each bite. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. There was still a road ahead, healing, court, facing Jake again, but she wasn't alone anymore. Sam glanced at her and gave a small, reassuring smile. "One step at a time," he said. She nodded. One step. For the first time, she believed the words. By late morning, the little cafe had filled with the smell of fresh bread and voices from the street outside. Emily sat across from Sam, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since cooled. The warmth of the room helped quiet the tremor in her hands, but she could still feel echoes of the rope around her wrists. Every so often, she rubbed at them, as though she could erase the marks with her fingertips. Sam watched without saying anything. He knew people needed time to settle after a hard day, and words sometimes only crowded the space they needed to breathe. When Emily finally looked up, she caught him studying her and gave a shy half-smile. "I don't even know how to start over," she admitted. "Everything I'd planned feels gone." Sam leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Start small," he said. "First, know you made it through. Then decide the next right thing. You don't have to see the whole trail right now." His calm tone steadied her more than any grand promise could. Emily let her shoulders drop, realizing how tight they had been. Outside, the marshal passed by, tipping his hat through the window. He paused just long enough to reassure them that Jake Mercer remained locked in the cell. "We'll keep watch until the judge rides in," he called. Sam nodded, satisfied, but Emily's gaze slid to the doorway, as though expecting trouble anyway. "Scars don't vanish overnight," Sam said gently, noticing her look. "But they stop bleeding given time." They finished their meal and stepped back into the bright day. The street was alive now, merchants arranging goods on wooden tables, a group of children chasing each other through the dust, a man sweeping his porch. Emily took it in, her eyes adjusting to the simple rhythm of ordinary life. She felt a quiet ache for something steady like this. Sam led her toward the corral where his mare stood tied. He checked the reins and glanced toward the marshal's office. "I'll stay close until this is settled," he told her. "After that, you'll decide where you want to go." Emily hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of carrying other people's burdens?" she asked softly. Sam looked at her for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said, voice low, "but leaving someone behind hurts worse." They walked together along the boardwalk, their steps falling into the same rhythm. Emily found herself talking in a way she hadn't in years, about her parents' small farm, about how quiet the nights were before Jake turned them dark, about the dreams she had pushed aside. Sam listened without interrupting, nodding now and then, his weathered face open. When they reached the edge of town, the land stretched out wide and gold beneath the sun. Sam rested a boot on the rail and looked across it. "Country like this," he said, "can swallow a person or set them free. Depend what you hold on to." Emily followed his gaze, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. She thought about the tree, the fight, the long road that had led here. She also thought about the steady way Sam had stood between her and danger, not asking for anything in return. For the first time, the future didn't seem like a blank wall, but a space waiting for her to draw something new. A deputy appeared, calling Sam's name. "Judge is coming in by dusk," he said. "He'll want statements." Sam tipped his hat in thanks, then turned to Emily. "We'll get this behind you before sundown." She nodded, surprised at how much lighter the promise felt compared to the morning. Maybe safety wasn't a single moment. Maybe it was a string of choices, hers included. As they headed back toward the marshal's office, Sam kept an easy pace so she could walk beside him. Emily's steps were still slow, but they were her own. With each one, the day grew less about what Jake had taken and more about what she might claim again. Her strength, her voice, a chance at a life no longer ruled by fear. The sun was sliding low when the judge finally rode into town, dust rising behind his horse. People gathered near the marshal's office, curious about the case that had stirred the quiet streets. Emily stood close to Sam on the boardwalk, the evening light soft against her face. She still carried the marks of the day before, but there was something steadier in her now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there when Sam first found her. Inside the office, the judge listened carefully as the marshal spoke. Sam gave his report in plain words, steady and calm. Emily told her story too, this time without shaking. She kept her eyes on the judge, not on Jake, who sat in irons at the back of the room. The outlaw tried to smirk, but it no longer reached his eyes. For once, he was the one trapped, and he knew it. When the hearing ended, the judge ordered Jake taken east to face trial. The deputies led him out, his boots scraping across the floorboards. Emily watched without flinching. The sound of the cell door closing somewhere down the hall felt like the day drawing a firm line between then and now. Sam touched the brim of his hat and looked at her. "It's done," he said simply. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A weight she'd carried since yesterday, maybe longer, began to ease. "I didn't think I'd see this," she admitted. "I thought that tree was the end of everything." Sam's voice softened. "You held on, Emily. That's what mattered." They stepped outside together. The street glowed in the last amber light. Children's laughter floated through the warm air. A shopkeeper swept dust from his porch. Life, ordinary and steady, went on. Emily leaned against the railing, watching the sky turn shades of rose and gold. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Sam said. "You decide what comes next. Maybe work for a spell. Maybe head somewhere new. Whatever you choose, make it yours." She looked at him, eyes bright but thoughtful. "Will you be leaving soon?" "About to spread out past the hills," he replied. "Plenty of fence to mend. But I'll stay in town until I'm sure you're safe." Emily smiled, a small, true smile. "Thank you, Sam. Not just for saving me, but for seeing me." He tipped his hat. Sometimes the hardest thing is to look close at someone's hurt and not turn away. World's better when we don't. They stood quiet for a while, watching the horizon darken. A few stars blinked awake above the rooftops. Emily felt the air settle inside her, calm and whole. She wasn't the same woman who had dangled helpless from a tree. She was alive, and her life was her own. As they walked toward the cafe for supper, Emily glanced back once at the Marshal's office. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything, and about the people who had chosen to stand between her and harm. The lesson sat clear in her heart. Courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's the choice to care, to act when others stay silent, to keep hope alive even when the world turns cruel. Sam held the door open for her, and she stepped inside, warm light spilling over her shoulders. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would meet it standing, not hiding. And she knew now she wasn't alone. Not because someone had rescued her, but because someone had reminded her she was worth rescuing. Outside, the last streaks of sunlight faded from the prairie. Stars gathered across the sky like quiet witnesses, shining over a town that had seen one more wrong set right, and two people who had found, in the middle of hardship, a reason to believe in kindness again.